The way I like to break peace down is for my students and now for your audience is this, and it's a simplified way to look at peace. I call it the three ingredients of peace. So let's start there. And these are subjective, but even though they're subjective, they're going to have outcomes, and those outcomes are going to be noteworthy. And the way I see this, the outcomes are either going to move you to optimal peace or fragile peace. Just think of a spectrum, and you're going to know the difference, right? So, but let's look at the three ingredients. So ingredient one is safety. And again, these are the three ingredients of peace that I've come up with to help my students understand the nature of peace. So we all need safety. We were born needing safety. All humans need this sense of being the protection and everything is going to be okay. And that safety is that inward part. It's the part where we trust our relationships that we're in, or we trust that our parent is not going to hurt us.
That was Reba Parker, and you've landed on the Me&My Health Up podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hartcher, a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being. And today we have Professor Reba Parker, who is a professor of sociology, and she's been teaching the sociology of peace for 16 years, and she's going to enlighten you on the subjects of peace, how to find more inner and outer peace in your life, how to live a more fulfilling and purposeful life. So without much further ado, I'd love to welcome you into this episode and discussion I'm having with Reba Parker. Welcome on the Me&My Health Up podcast. How are you, Reba Parker?
I'm doing fantastic, Anthony. It's good to see you.
Lovely to meet you, and the audience will pick up that you have a American accent, so they're probably wondering where you're dialing in from or joining from.
Yeah, I'm actually coming in from Portland, Oregon, but I grew up in the South, so this southern part of the United States. That's what you're picking up on, but I actually live in Portland, Oregon.
That's nice. And today we're going to be talking about a very important subject. Certainly the listeners will be really intrigued to hear what you've got to share about the peaceability mindset. And they're probably wondering what peaceability mindset is. But, from my, in terms of in clinic and in practice, I see a lot of people in a frazzled state, in a very busy mind, busy life, busy world, and often frantic and often a bit disoriented as to what to do next because there's so much to do. And so I'm really looking forward to having this discussion with you in terms of how we can create a more peaceful mind for the listener. So let's get into talking about the peaceability mindset in terms of what it is and how we go about achieving it.
Okay, well, thank you again for having me. And I wrote this book actually this year, and the peaceability mindset is basically what it suggests. It's pairing peace with ability. So it's basically the ability to do peace. The way I like to define it is peaceability mindset is peace plus a growth mindset. So I actually am a college professor. I teach at the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina, and I teach a class called Sociology of Peace. So I've been teaching this course for 16 years. I've taught it over 100 times, and I've actually taught at the Citadel, which is a military university, teaching this core class. So I've talked to a lot of students, and what I've found out early on is that my students don't believe that peace is possible for a lot of various reasons. And because of that, they walk into my course and they're very skeptical that there's actually ways to peace, to embody peace, to enact peace, to engage in peace. And they're clueless and they pretty much sign up because they think it's an easy course. Really, what are we going to get out of this course on peace? So they walk in believing that peace is about hippies, that it's impossible, that it's the absence of war, that it's yoga poses or meditation practices. And they walk out seeing peace in a brand new light. And they're actually seeing that peace is very possible, that is relevant, that is practical, is doable, is measurable. And this is what I'd like to bring to your audience today.
Excellent. No, so I think that would be really good is to get some clarity as to what it is from a mindset perspective.
Yes, okay, very good. That is an excellent question. So again, I surveyed my students. Over the last 16 years, I've been surveying them, and they pretty much give the same answers every semester. When I asked them, what's the first thing that comes to their mind when they see a peace sign? That's one of the very first questions. What they will say, typically about 70% of them will say, when I see the peace sign, I think of hippies. I think of psychedelic drugs. I think of Woodstock. I think of the 60s and 70s. I think about my Halloween costume with the gaudy peace sign and the bell-bottom pants. This is what they think of when they see a peace sign. And by the way, the peace sign is it's the third most recognizable sign in the world, with the Christian cross being number one, the Red Cross being number two, and then the peace sign. So if what we see when we see a peace sign, according to my students, is 60 years in the past, how can we take peace seriously? How can it become relevant today in our life when it's stuck in the past? It's a memory of the past. And that's the first thing that comes in their mind. And Anthony, I know you can appreciate this based on your background, that when you see something, it evokes emotions. And so those emotions really determine whether we shut our body down or move forward. And if peace is seen as impossible or whimsical or dated, why would that prompt someone to action? It won't. So my suggestion in the book is, let's reframe the way we see peace, understand peace, which will help us reframe the way we feel about peace. And instead of feeling as if it's dated or impossible, what if peace was relevant and extremely possible and had immense possibilities or opportunities? So this is the new way of thinking I would like my students to see, in which they do by the time they leave my class. They can see that peace is possible, and they have tools and practices and skills to move it forward in their practical everyday life. So I believe we really need to reframe the way we think about the word peace and the symbol, so that we can see it in a light that's very, very relevant for the lives we live every single day.
So is peace, in terms of how you're defining it, is it like the mind at ease? Like, is it, I'm just like, so I'm thinking, well, obviously we grow up, there's peace and war, right? So, and the polar
Right.
opposites. And so so I could see where people have that sort of mindset and mentality around, like, peace could just be the absence of wars. In terms of our mind, we can feel, our mind's working with us and supportive, or the mind's working against us and we're in conflict. And so where do you sit in terms of helping your students understand what is peace? And I assume there's a subjective element to this, right? Because we all have this uniqueness, and we experience the world in different ways based on our upbringings and things like that. And
Right.
yeah, so there's many influencing factors as to how we would perceive peace, and what peace is for me compared to someone else. And like, if you're brought up in a very hostile environment, peace would just be the absence of the hostility, right? So whereas
Exactly.
if you're brought up in a loving environment, peace would be something different. It may just be solace, or just time away from, I guess, being covered in love or smothered in love. I'm not sure, but anyway, I'm really keen to get your take.
Right. Well, I come from a sociology background. I'm a sociology professor. And so it is a science. And so actually, we can measure peace today. So there's elements of peace that are quantifiable. But that subjective part you were talking about, Anthony, is the qualitative parts of peace. And you can actually study and measure qualitative parts of anything, basically, but peace in general. And so let's unpack that for a little bit. I think it's interesting what you said, that when somebody is raised in a violent home, their peace and their need for peace is going to be quite different. The way I like to break peace down is, for my students and now for your audience, is this, and it's a simplified way to look at peace. I call it the three ingredients of peace. So let's start there. And these are subjective, but even though they're subjective, they're going to have outcomes, and those outcomes are going to be noteworthy. And the way I see this, the outcomes are either going to move you to optimal peace or fragile peace. Just think of a spectrum. and you're going to know the difference, right? So, but let's look at the three ingredients. So, ingredient one is safety. And again, these are the three ingredients of peace that I've come up with to help my students understand the nature of peace. So, we all need safety. We were born needing safety. All humans need this sense of being the protection and everything is going to be okay. And that safety is that inward part. It's the part where we trust our relationships that we're in, or we trust that our parent is not going to hurt us, right? So it's those personal parts. And then the second part of the equation is well-being, or I say well-beingness, right? And that really speaks to your audience. The way I like to describe it is well-being is leading toward thriving. Safety is leading towards survival. So we need that survival mode. We have an instinct towards survival, but a lot of us are moving into it's not enough to just be surviving. I want to thrive and live well and live to my fullest potential. That's that well-beingness, right? And then the third part of the equation is interconnectedness. And this is that part where we all come together. We're all interconnected, interrelated. Every piece and part of the universe is interconnected. So is that element of providing is what I like to say, where we provide to others and the world and other people provide back to us. That's the give and take. And that beautiful relationship when it's in harmony, of course, right? So you add these three components and we can study well-beingness. I know that's what you do for a living. And you can tell when a body is in a peaceful state or not, if someone's hypervigilant, right? And then in that sympathetic state. And we can measure physical health. So we can measure well-beingness and we can pretty much measure safety. I live in a very, very safe home. I live in a safe neighborhood. And how do I know that? You can say it's subjective, but I can walk down the street at night with my dogs and feel fine. I can leave the door unlocked for a few hours and feel okay about that. So, and then that interconnectedness, that is the beauty. It's the give and take, and we all need each other. So to have safety and well-being without connection, we're missing the full scope of peace.
I really like it because it sort of, for me, when you're sharing that, the basis is the foundations is that you need to feel safe and feel secure. And I was thinking of that Maslow's hierarchy of the needs, right?
For
So
sure.
yeah, yeah. And in order to actualize and move up, we have to have that solid, security, safety net, food, shelter, all of that in order to,
Right.
discover our full potential. And that's what you were mentioning, that well-beingness is the ability to grow and thrive and to be your best self. But in order to
Yes.
do that, you've got to have the basic needs met, our basic human needs met.
That's right.
And then to ultimately become like, if in a spiritual ways, when we're being fully interconnected with everyone and everything, we're becoming more one, right? Yeah.
Yes. And that is, Anthony, that is the essence of peace. That's the essence of not just the way I like to see it is when I break down the word, I use the word in my book, well-beingness, right? But when I think about wellness, I think about physical health. I think about my lifestyle habits, drinking a smoothie in the morning and going to yoga class or exercising. So when I think about being instead of wellness, well-being, I'm thinking more about working on myself and loving myself and getting in touch with my felt sense and all those things. So the first one is you're doing things. The second one, well-being, you're actually who is the person that you are, right? Is that being in wellness. But well-beingness to me is a step up. It's not the physical or the psychological side, but it's the philosophical, the spiritual, and it is that interconnectedness. So well-beingness is just a step up, and it's where your essence and your presence is wholeness. So you are peace. You're not being or doing it, but you are. And that is a very special place to be, that place of transcendence. So I know these are lofty steps and goals, but they don't have to be because you start with everyday actions in everyday life.
Yeah,
So
so
yeah.
I was just thinking, like, because it's pretty much a lifelong journey, right? So I like, as a kid, we're learning survival skills, so
Yes.
we're learning how to become more and more independent and less dependent, and then we realize, we need this interconnectedness in order to continue to move forward in life. I'm just thinking, like your students are very much that sort of late teens, early 20s, and
Yes.
that prefrontal cortex is still developing, and their brain's doing the pruning and whatnot. And they can easily slip into that more, I guess, survival mode. Like, it must be a hard concept to teach that age group given where they're at in their development. Like, so for me, I've had a lifelong journey of, discovering myself, who I am, and realize that's a journey. And, early on in life, it was, uh, I guess you're just trying to fit in. You're trying to be like everyone else in order to feel valued and whatnot. But then you start to be yourself and get more comfortable being yourself and accepting who you are. So there's a real journey behind this. So how do you like take this concept and really help, I guess, your students in terms of where they're at in terms of taking that next step? And what is that next step?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think the first step is challenging the way you view peace and seeing it with new eyes. The way I start my class off, Anthony, is we watch a film called The Day After Peace. It's an amazing film. It shows Jeremy Gilley is the documentary filmmaker that created this film years ago, but it shows peace in action. And actually in Afghanistan, they were able to stop the war, and even the Taliban stopped the war so that they could get aid in on Peace Day, which is September 1st of every year. So, bottom line, my students saw in that film that they were able to stop war and get vaccinations into these children on Peace Day because both sides decided to stop fighting. But there's a whole thing around the International Day of Peace, and it's well established now. But the point is, my students were able to believe that peace is possible in a very tangible way from this film. So we rethink our the way we see peace and understand peace, number one. But I also provide something called the 7 peaceability factors. And we talked about those 3 ingredients, right? Safety. And we talked about well-beingness and interconnectedness. So I divide those up into sectors. And under those, I give very tangible ways that they can do safety and tangible ways that they can move into well-beingness. So I give them a roadmap. And then the same for interconnectedness. In my chapter on safety, I offer a conflict resolution. So I show them how to resolve a conflict in a home or in their dating life. That's very relevant and practical. And then we talk about resilience, and that's the ability to adapt when hard times come. So that's a skill that you can learn that helps you with moving toward safety. And then connectedness creates more safety. So we talk about how you can connect in your culture and your society. And then I move into the chapter on well-beingness. And there the 2 ingredients are understanding and empathy. And so I give them tools and how to do that. Let me give you an example. I used to do this in my classes, and it's called the uncomfortable place experiment. So I had my students, they had, as a group, they had to decide which group in our city they were going to visit. And so they were just going to show up at a meeting or a group. Of course, it had to be a group where they were allowed to attend, but it had to be a place that made them uncomfortable. So, for example, this is Charleston, South Carolina. A lot of my students are white students, Caucasian students. So some of them would go to an African American church, right? And they would see a different culture there. Some of them went to an open AA meeting, or they would go to a bingo parlor where people were older and they didn't know the norms or the rules. They would go to meetings of the opposite political party and be a part of their meetings. So what it did, Anthony, is they stepped into a place where they didn't understand the other. They were nervous. They didn't know the norms, the habits, the language, and they were the outsiders. And by the time they left and came back and reported on their experience, they felt a sense of we-ness, and they became connected to that other group somehow. Because afterwards there would be a meet and greet or refreshments, and folks would come up and ask them why they were there, these young students, and they got to hear their stories and get to understand the other. And just by doing this experiment, they realized that we're not really that different. So this is just one way that my students were able to understand the other, and understanding leads to respect. So can you imagine in a divided world, if we would just spend time with those on the other side, whatever that side is, and get to know them, just breaking that barrier leads to so many times respect. And that's the beginning of well-beingness.
Percent. Like I really liked how you put them into a unfamiliar an environment where they don't, and they can't see how they fit, right? Because there's either an age barrier or there's a color barrier, or there's some sort of initial perceived barrier that I just,
Sure.
yeah, I myself do not fit in this environment. And you spoke about adaptation and how to adapt, and you teach your students on how to adapt to certain situations. So what is some of the adaptation strategies when you go into, because even as adults, we go into, social events or social occasions where we might not know many people. We might know one or two people, but the majority of people we don't know, and we feel a bit uncomfortable. So have you got some strategies that you shared with your students as to how they can more assimilate or better fit in?
Yeah. Well, when I'm talking about adaptation in the book, I'm focused more on resilience. But in the realm of understanding, I teach my students nonviolent communication, compassionate speaking. I also teach them empathetic listening. So they now have the skills when they go into a group that they don't know who these folks are, the way they approach them in their language. And also when they're listening to their story, they're able to sit back and not be the star of the show and talk about everything that they have going on in their life, which is a lot, but they're really listening. And that's so respectful. And that person, the way I like to describe it with empathetic listening and nonviolent communication, what happens is when you're speaking nonviolently, you're pulling that person in automatically. It's like a magical drawing in. When you speak violently, and by the way, violently doesn't have to be harsh words. It could be just demands. But when you're speaking in terms like that, you're actually pulling somebody back. They're not interested in being near you. So just the tools of nonviolent communication teaches my students how to draw that human being in. And once they're in, guess what they're doing? They're
Listening.
listening.
They're listening.
They're
Yeah.
listening and they're connecting. And then they're understanding. And there's no need for, well, let me tell you what I do to change this. There's no need to give examples or explain anything. You're just connecting as a human. So I think these are two skills. I also teach my students to think about an important part of dignity is calling somebody by their name. So it's when you meet somebody, you ask them what their name is and you use their name. To me, it's a high form of respect and especially dignity. So it's these little things that will help the people that you're meeting with want to stay near you and talk to you and trust you and open up. And that's where the magic happens in those moments.
Yeah, I find what helps me, and it'll be probably part of what you share with your students, is really going in with a curious mindset, is thinking
Yes.
like I know nothing about this population or this demographic, and I'd love to find more. I'd love to know, what makes them tick and how they connected, and more about what it's like being, live, or how they live their life and what they've experienced. And so I go in there being really curious, and that means I'm open, like I'm just asking open-ended questions. It's not about me. It's all about understanding them and just listening.
Right.
And through that, I'm able to better relate because I can see how they've arrived at, who they are today based on their journey, and, without judgment. Like it's just saying, oh, like, oh, wow, you've experienced this. I can see how you now see this in terms of your world, and through that you can better, yeah, I guess, relate to them, empathize and understand them, and through that exercise, you're connecting deeper with them because you're not judging them. No, it's in that.
This notion of this idea that we're all connected is we're all a community and we're all members of a community. So there's no hierarchy there. And it's just relating. even to the environment. I love that idea of, I speak about it in the Peaceability Mindset, is when you view the environment as we're part of that community instead of we're the domination, in the domination mode, we're in the partnership mode. And then I teach my students about in relationship to power, there can be power with or power over. One's domination, somebody's right. That's what you were speaking to, Anthony, that you don't have to be right. It's about understanding. In the partnership model, it's not about domination, but it's about linking. So it's this linking together. And it's not about debate, but dialogue. All of these things help us to learn to connect. And once we do, we have that understanding. And that, to me, is the heart of well-beingness, is that deep, rich place of understanding who we are, accepting who we are, and understanding someone else and accepting them. I don't even like the word accepting so much because to me, it means there's something we need to accept, right? I like the word nurturance, which is we celebrate the fact that another human being is here and what they have to offer me and what I have to offer them is beyond our mind right now. We don't know. But there's magic in those moments. So it's not totally about accepting. I don't like the word tolerating either. That's a negative framework. And to me, accepting can be as well. But this idea of nurturance or nurturing is we're all in this together and we offer each other something.
Yeah, like one of the concepts that I think is like we have this filter as to how we see the world, right? And those people are helping us to expand or to make it more translucent, and like essentially dissolve our filter, because they're opening us up to experiences that we haven't had, or seeing the world from another perspective, and why that might have come about. And so yeah, we can really, I guess, dissolve our filter and have a much connected lens to the world the way it is, and people as to who they are, and as
Yes,
opposed this judgment, which I guess makes it more black and white.
for sure.
Yeah, more see through. So like, is there, like, I think part of this is knowing thyself. And I think your students, where they're at in life, would be still working that out. And it's taken me a long time to work out who I am. So what sort of path do you help your students on in order to discovering who they are?
Yeah, I use a skill in my class that I think is helpful. And I start out with the sociological angle, which is society at large. And then we break it down. And by the time they end the semester, they are focused on inner self and inner peace. But we start out at the macro. And I want to speak to your audience as well, because a lot of your audience aren't young people, but we're all still moving toward that place of feeling. The way I like to describe peace is it is well with my soul, that inner peace. It is well with my soul. It's that sense of wholeness and completeness. So one way that I show my students is I show them a spectrum early on in class. And my mother, early on, when I told her I was teaching a class on peace, she said that's the most ridiculous thing she's ever heard. She said, why would you teach a class on peace? Now, she comes from a conservative religious background, and she said that we won't have peace till Jesus comes. So why work toward that? So I came up with a pitch to sell this to my mom, but I basically started using it with my students. But here it is. Why would I teach a class on peace, or why would I talk to you folks about peace? The way we can understand it is peace is possible and we can move toward it. If you see a spectrum, Anthony, and on one end you have a culture of peace and on the other end you have a culture of violence. We are, as individuals, moving either toward a culture of peace or a culture of violence every single day. What I show them in my class on a macro level is that countries can move toward a culture of peace or toward a culture of violence. We can measure peace now, and the Global Peace Index measures which countries in the world are the most peaceful. Iceland's number one, and then, we have Russia and Ukraine and Syria and some of those countries at the very bottom. Australia's 18th out of 63 countries. But we can see that countries can move toward cultures of peace. And there's steps in a roadmap to get them there. So when I show them that, then I show them ways that you can do that individually. And this is getting to your question. So the way I do it for myself, now this is very subjective, But we do this with our kids. And I know you're into nutritional health, but if you were asked a child or your son or daughter, how do I feel? If let's say they're sick, how do you feel today? And they'll go, say on a spectrum from 1 to 10, 10 feeling really bad. They'll go, well, I feel about a 5, right? It's subjective, but they're telling us where they're landing if they're not feeling that great. We can do the same with peace. So look on that scale, a culture of peace and a culture of violence, or you can say optimal peace and fragile peace. And I'll ask them, where do you feel like individually that you are on the spectrum in your personal life with this idea of inner peace? And students know whether they're really high up or really low on that spectrum. They will know, and your audience will know. And in a marriage, I'm married. I can tell you where our relationship lands on this spectrum, where our home lands. Our home is about a 9.3. That's what I like to say. It's a very safe place. Why? Because it's very, very safe. We are open to well-beingness. When we want to grow as humans, we open the door to that and we applaud it and celebrate our unique endeavors instead of going, why would you change your eating habits like that? Right. And so, or whatever thing you need to do to lean into well-beingness, we accept that in our home. And then that interconnectedness, our community we have in our home and around our home. But you can do the same individually for my students and for your audience on peace. So where do you land on a spectrum? And if you know your levels aren't where you would like them to be, how can you move them up? And the formula I like to use is, how is your safety measuring up? We start there with my students. So I give them a list, Anthony, and let's give this to your audience. I give them a list and I'll say, is your neighborhood safe? On a scale from 1 to 10, where does it land? Where is your life at school? Where are you landing with your nation right now? In your religious community, where do you land if you're a part of a religious community? And they can determine, some of my students will say, I'll say, do you feel safe within yourself? And they will say, I'm a 3, but my neighborhood's a 10. Right? Or it could be the other way around. Let's say, what is your sexual orientation? Where do you land on scale with that? And being authentic to yourself. So we have these sensors that can determine where we fall. And then I go back to the formula: safety, interconnectedness, and well-being. And you start with safety and work there, and then well-beingness as well. How healthy are you? Not just physically, but emotionally and with your social interactions and maybe your spiritual life. Same thing.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you're, explaining this, concept around peaceability and, peace and war and the different areas of your life. I was thinking, like, from a nutritional perspective, I see a lot of body image issues, right? So they could actually have a really supportive, loving environment around them, helping them, but they've got conflict inside themselves. Their minds totally just pulling them apart with this body dysmorphia and saying that they're fat all the time, and they're actually not, and they've got all this support around them, so that you can have that a great environment around you and very supportive, yet your inner world is really a conflict, and comes back to that what you said, that we need to not necessarily accept, but really just love what we have and who we are, and go on that journey. Like, I just see it particularly, this would be quite prevalent with your students. Like, it's sort of very much those years are the years that body image is, yeah. So how do
Right.
you approach that subject with your students? I think it would come up.
Yeah, body image, it goes back to this idea of, if we really think of the deepest levels of peace, is that state of it is well with my soul, but is that wholeness and that fullness that peace brings. A lot of my students aren't there. They're still discovering themselves. And in class, there can be, well, judgment, but also comparisons of each other with social media. So I think one of the best ways to move toward accepting yourself is finding your inner peace. And the 5 steps I give in my book on inner peace is loving yourself deeply. And sometimes, this, Anthony, it's working on yourself. It might be going to therapy or getting coaching, but it's diving deep to those places that are keeping you stuck, or that you might have trauma that you need to work through. A lot of my students have trauma. So yes, they have body image issues, but they also have extreme trauma from the past. So that it needs to be addressed so that you can get to those places where you see yourself and the fullness of yourself. Another way that I like to help my students connect to their inner peace is connecting to life. And that can be going outside. It can be in nature. It can be working with food and gardening. It can be connecting with people in their community. So that connecting with other people allows you to not focus on that outward appearance so much. And then practice mindfulness is really, really important, because when you are moving toward mindfulness, you don't have a body, a name. You are more than that. And again, that's this whole area. And then you move into giving and serving. And when you're giving and serving, you're not focused so much on yourself. And then when you do focus on yourself, you feel good. So there's a lot of components to getting to that place where you have that deep sense of inner peace. But again, you know this with depression, you step out in nature, you ground yourself, you eat good food, you get good sleep. All these things are going to help you feel better, but also it's going back to loving yourself. And that's going to take work. And I know you and I have been working on this for a very long time, and we will continue to. But peace is possible and it's practical. It is something you can move into, and the outcomes will bear fruit. So these are things I share in my class, and it helps them to step away from themselves and this notion of comparing, because the world's much bigger than comparing ourselves to another person. And when my students begin to find their meaning, their sense of meaning and purpose, which they do a lot in college, they will latch on to some kind of major that draws them in and provides passion. And when they're in those spaces, they're not thinking so much about themselves. So it's a little diversion technique, but in spite of that, you are loving life with what you're doing. And it brings this sense of peace in these different modalities, whether it's connecting to people or being in nature or finding yourself in that felt sense, or in mindfulness, being present to something larger than yourself in that moment, which you're doing. You're more
Wow.
than your outside body. And I think by the end of the class, students really began to connect the dots on that.
Wow, I'm sure the listeners want to become your students. So, can you please share a little bit more about your book? I mean, you have been
Yeah.
sharing aspects of your book, yeah, but in terms of where they can buy it and what they'd get out of the book, because I think
Yeah.
there's so much more that we could talk for hours, but it's
Yeah, for sure.
all bundled up in your book. So, yeah, please share the details.
I appreciate that, Anthony. So it just came out in end of May. It's on all the online platforms, so you can find it there, and it's in some local bookstores. And the thing I would like for you to take away from this book is after you get through reading this book, you'll never see peace the same way ever again. You won't see the image of peace sign, but when you hear the word peace, it will have a different meaning to you. And the book is a call to action, because we need more peace in our lives. We need more peace in our world, in our communities, more than ever. And Anthony, you started this podcast talking about all the noise. It brings in the silence so we can sit with the beauty of everything in front of us. And so, again, the book starts off with, how do we reframe peace, change our mindset, and change our paradigm of peace? And when you see peace as possibilities and opportunities, it changes everything. Once you can move through that process, I step into, in the book, the 7 peaceability factors. So I give you examples on understanding our empathy, which draws in well-beingness, or congruency, and stakeholdership, which draws in interconnectedness. So I give a lot of examples. So after we move out of that, I move in more to the macro levels. I do the 5 habits of peace, things you can do every single day that move you toward peace, the 5 steps to inner peace. And then we look at the larger domain of the systems of peace. And these are discrimination, all those kind of big institutionalized systems that we can now see that we can counteract those, and their strategies for peace. So it moves into that. Then I move into the environment and peace. A lot of people never make the connection between the environment and a practical peace. This chapter is probably my favorite in the entire book, and it draws that connection so well. And then I close out with a transcendence in peace, that holistic peace where you are peace, you become peace, and it's that fullness and that wholeness. So I start with the changing the mindset, offering skills, practices, tools, and then move in to personal peace, move into societal peace just a bit, environment, and intransigence. And that's, to me, it's a full scope of how you can practically move toward cultures of peace every day in your own life and see that peace is practical and relevant. It's not a memory of the past, but it can help us really see what the future looks like, and it provides a sense of hope.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to reading the book. I think that there's a lot there and a lot that's very helpful. And it's something that I would love to be introduced into schools at an earlier age. I think it's great that at least getting to university students, but it'll be good to get it into the high school, and even you could even come up with a framework for primary school students, because these are really essential, what I see as essential life skills.
Right.
And how to live a more fulfilling life, a more purposeful life. So I think what the work you're doing is absolutely fantastic, and really look forward
Well,
to
thank you.
sharing it as much as I can with others to really get your knowledge out there and to help each one of us. Thank you so much, Reba, for putting aside the time, coming on
You're
the show,
welcome.
sharing your book, the details, and to the listeners, I'll include the links to the book in the show notes, the links to connect with Reba in the show notes, so you can go directly to the show notes and click on those links. And Reba, have you got any concluding words you'd like to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I would like to maybe offer up a quote. And this quote is Jody Williams, who won a Nobel Peace Prize. But she said this: if we can begin to believe that peace is more than the utopian image, but it's something that we do every single day and it's a responsibility, then we can move toward peace. So I would like to challenge your readers to think of peace not so much, again, as these far out notions, but see it as a responsibility that's ours to really put ourselves and who we are uniquely and others out into the world. And it offers so much hope. So reframe peace. Let's start thinking about peace. Peace is possible, and there's so much here. So I challenge you to think of peace in a different way, and let's get going. Let's do this thing.
Absolutely. Let's get on this movement of yours. So
Yeah.
fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on the show, Reba. Great discussion. And
Thank you.
definitely have you back on the show. So thank you.
I would love that. I would love that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And to the listeners, thank you for tuning in. Please share it with others that you believe would benefit from listening to this discussion with Reba on Peaceability Mindset. Please share it far and wide, and we can help more people be at more peace with themselves, the world, and the people around them. So please share it with others. Thank you.
Okay.
Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand Me&My Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. Me&My Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, Me&My Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of Me&My Health Up.